I work for an animal removal company in Atlanta. You see a lot of strange things at this job, and I have had my share of the unexpected. But I've never been scared. Not really scared until I took a job in the North Georgia mountains. It all started 2 weeks ago. I was at work when I received this batshit crazy email. This is what it said. Calling all wildlife warriors. I recently came across some glowing reviews of your company, and I would like to ask you for a quote for your services. Now, you may not want to accept this offer at first, but if you are the fearless animal removal experts that the reviews paint you to be, then you'll accept the challenge I'm about to set before you. Now, I have it on very good authority that there is a Sasquatch in the North Georgia mountains. I know you think I'm crazy, but my cousin Eli has seen it firsthand. Not once, but twice. Damn near scared him half to death. Now Eli and I have been talking, and he thinks he has a pretty good idea where this thing has been living. You might want to ask me where, but I won't give you that information now, because I don't want you to run up there and bag and tag this monster without me. The plan is to capture the beast alive. If push comes to shove and the beast has murder in its heart, well, we may have to shoot him. I'm not sure how aggressive these things are, but I've never seen a news report of someone being slain by a Sasquatch, so I assume they aren't overly unfriendly. The only obstacle Eli and I are facing is our lack of animal handling skills. I don't even have a pet dog, and Eli really only traps squirrels, and neither of us believes that talent will have much overlap with Bigfoot hunting. And that is where the seasoned professionals come in. I'm talking about you. Now, I know this is a lot to ask the common man, but maybe you aren't so common after all. Maybe you are destined for greatness, like Eli and myself. Now you'd have to provide some traps, bin dance, and maybe some treats for the animal, as well as your general knowledge of wildlife. Eli has already volunteered to be bait, and we both agreed that on the off chance the Sasquatch has a grasp of the English language, that I should be the one to speak on behalf of our party. Eli and I will both be chipping in to pay a handsome day rate. I expect this will take 3 to 4 days, one of which will be plotting and strategizing up at Eli's house. However, in the event of my death or Eli's death at the hands of the Squatch, total pay will be reduced by 50 to 100%, depending on if one or both of us die. Think about the possibilities. Be a part of the team that made history. Have her name etched in stone among mankind's greatest heroes. Buzz Aldrin, Julius Caesar, Eli Tebbets, Ross Tebbets, insert your name here. Oh yeah, Jesus Christ. Not to mention the effect this could have on your business. I mean, if you can handle a Sasquatch, then people are going to have no problem paying top dollar for, raccoon removal. Heck, I'm sure people will hire you just to have you come out and shake their hand. Please get back to us soon, as we aren't sure if this beast is migratory, and we do not want to miss our chance at history. Sincerely, Russ. Tibbets. He ended with a quote. It's hard to be a diamond in a rhinestone world. Dolly Parton. Yeah, I know it's insane, but it was too damn funny not to do a follow-up. I had to at least find out what they were paying, so I sent an email back saying I was interested, but I needed more details before I could clear my schedule. A few days later, I got another email from Ross detailing what they would need. Bear traps, predator urine to hide our scent, a deer stand, rope, bear mace, a sleeping bag, snares, a snare pole, and a winning attitude. And my salary is $650 a day. Now I had most of the equipment already, and I could pick up the rest in one afternoon of running errands. And I had found the winning attitude as soon as I saw how much they were paying. So I emailed them back, agreeing to the job. 2 days later, I was in the North Georgia mountains, wondering if this was going to be easing money, or if two meth heads named Eli and Ross were going to kill me and wear my skin as a raincoat. I was really hoping for easing money. Eli's cabin was this small wooden shack near the Georgia-North Carolina border. The two cousins greeted me as I pulled in. Ross was short, pudgy, and he had oil-slicked back hair. He was also manic, talking a mile a minute about how my drive was, how beautiful the weather was for me, and how we were going to make history. He peppered every conversation with quotes about success and greatness. Now some are born great, some achieve greatness. Some get it as a graduation gift. Robin Williams said that. Now we're going to achieve greatness this weekend, and I'll tell you that much. And Theodore Roosevelt once said it is hard to fail, but it is worse never to have tried. Ross was incredibly annoying. I'm not going to lie. Eli, on the other hand, could not have been more different from his cousin. He was older. He had leathery, sun-damaged skin and was going gray on the sides of his head. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was mostly in short, declarative statements like, yeah or nah. Or less often, some strange southern platitude, such as Ross, you ain't got the sense that God gave a goose. Or I reckon that Squatch will be mattered with it. Yeah, this was going to be a long 3 or 4 days. The first night was spent plotting and strategizing, as Ross said. The thrust of their brilliant plan was this. Eli would somehow draw it out of the cave he suspected it was hiding in. If the monster, by some ridiculous freakish miracle, knew English, then Ross would reason with it, convince it to let us take it captive. I don't know. As dumb as this guy was, I had to admire his confidence, though. In the event the Sasquatch was lured into the open, and it did not possess a firm grasp of English, then I had been instructed to do my thing. Incredible minds hatch incredible plans. I had to keep thinking about the money to stop myself from thinking how stupid this entire situation was. That night, we all slept in the one-room cabin. There was only one bed, so I took a sleeping bag on the ground. Ross took the bed, and Eli sat in a chair near the window and slowly sipped moonshine the entire night. You know, I don't think he slept at all. As I said before, he rarely spoke, but his eyes said enough. The guy was scared. At times I caught a tremble in his hand as he brought his cup to his lips. That was the first time I thought, if only for a moment, these guys might not be so crazy. The next morning, we set off. I carried an assortment of traps, lures, snares, and sprays. Ross carried camping gear. Eli carried provisions and a shotgun that I was extremely aware of at all times. We hiked the entire day without much luck. Periodically, Ross would stop the group and let loose one of his Bigfoot calls, which sounded a lot like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the midst of an orgasm. Yeah, well, anyway, about 2 hours before nightfall, we decided to stop and set up camp for the night. We dropped our bags and started making camp when we heard a ruckus from deeper in the forest. Ross held his finger to his lips to urge silence. I raised my snare pole in readiness, and Eli leveled a shotgun at the bushes. The noise grew louder and louder. Bushes shook, and a sharp coughing sound punctuated the otherwise silent forest until what looked like a gorilla burst from the foliage and ran directly toward us. "Freeze!" shouted Eli. "Gun at the ready." The gorilla instantly stopped dead in its tracks, and its hand shot up in the air. "Don't shoot," it said. I knew it would speak English. Ross sauntered forward with one hand extended in a show of peace. With his other hand, he slowly pulled a pair of handcuffs out of his back pocket and kept them hidden behind his back. "We mean you no harm. Oh, great one of the woods." And then the gorilla ripped off his own face, revealing a man underneath who looked directly at me. "Brad, have you ever gone on a faraway vacation and you run into your neighbor walking down the beach?" This was a lot like that. Just to replace vacation with Bigfoot hunt and neighbor with my biggest competitor, Kenny. "What the hell?" he said. I dropped the snare pole and walked over to him. "Hey, I know this guy," I said. And then another voice from the trees above us. Hell, Kenny, what did I say? Never take off the mask." And another man was sitting in a tree stand about 30 feet above our heads. The damn Squatch could be watching us right this instant, and you did blow your disguise. And now it was Eli and Ross's turn to be surprised as they turned and saw the man in the tree. Milton Ross turned to Eli, red-faced, and jabbed him in the chest with his finger. "I told you not to tell anyone else about this, Eli." And then he pointed the finger up at Milton, sitting in the tree. "And now we have competitors." Eli, showing emotion for the first time since I met him, pointed up at Milton and yelled, "You said you didn't believe me. You said even if it was true, we should leave it alone." And Eli wheeled around and looked at Kenny, who was now peeling off his gorilla costume. "You promised you wouldn't tell anybody." Milton stared back down at us from his perch. "Yeah, well." He leaned forward and spat on the ground below him. His saliva was dark, and it stank of chewing tobacco. I lied. More movement from the bushes drew our attention, and another man burst into the campsite. Boyd, Ross, and Eli shouted in unison. Milton How many people did you tell? We got half of Fannin County out here, Ross demanded. We all camped together that night. It turns out Milton and Boyd were barflies who Eli would get drunk with on occasion. A week or so ago, Eli had gotten a bit too drunk and spilled the beans about the Sasquatch and how he and his cousin would catch it and become rich and famous overnight. Rich and famous was too good for Milton to pass up, no matter how crazy the idea was. But he didn't want to split the money with Eli and Ross, so he got his own animal control expert and tried to catch the beast before Eli and Ross could get to it. Boyd was only allowed to tag along because he was too dumb to ask for money, and he'd do pretty much anything Milton told him to do. And Milton figured this would be a good time to have somebody like that by his side. While Ross, Eli, and Milton were in their own world talking and Boyd was off collecting firewood, I leaned over to Kenny and I asked him how much he's getting paid. "You're getting paid?" he asked. "I'm getting blackmailed." I didn't ask him any more questions. Eli, Ross, and I climbed into our way too small tent and we tried to get some shut-eye. I definitely would have preferred to sleep outside if the mosquitoes weren't so bad. Sharing a tent with those two, it was hell on earth. Not that any of us got much sleep. At least I wasn't in the tent with Milton, Boyd, and Kenny. I could smell Milton and Boyd from outside of their tent. I could not imagine what it was like inside. Not long after we put the fire out, the smell showed up. A thick, choking odor. It was a mixture of rotting meat, skunk, and wet dog. The noxious fumes came, so suddenly both tents erupted into hysterics, blaming one another for passing gas. The arguments were cut short, though, by what followed. A series of loud whoops echoed through the forest around us, bouncing off the trees and cliff sides. None of us could tell where it was coming from. It could have been a mile from us, or it could have been just outside the light of the dying fire. And then the noises changed. They grew louder and more pronounced, as if the creature reveled in the terror it brought to our campsite. Whatever it was, it came closer. It clawed at tree trunks, emitting sharp scratching sounds, and then it moved on to low guttural growls that vibrated through the ground. The unseen creature. It seemed to possess an otherworldly intelligence. It was like it was teasing us. It mimicked the calls of nocturnal animals in this chilling imitation. Ross, Eli, and I, we exchanged bewildered glances, unable to comprehend the nature of what lurked just outside the light suddenly. The forest reverberated with high-pitched screeches that sent our hands to our ears, and then it shifted again to the screams of a wounded animal, and then again to a series of eerie laughter echoing off in the distance, and then silence. I heard the other tent unzip their flap, and then I heard Milton say, "Get out there and put a few more logs on the fire. You don't want this thing sneaking up on us in the dark, do you?" A moment later, Boyd emerged from the tent. He hurriedly gathered a few pieces of nearby firewood and gently but quickly placed them around the embers of the fire so as to not smother it. All of us silently watched him from our tents, and then we heard a new noise. Quick, breathy whistle cut the silence for just a moment. Then a sickening crack as a fist-sized rock struck Boyd in the back of the head. He crumpled instantly in a heap next to the fire, his arms and legs twitching in a sick rhythm. The rock that hit him was still embedded in the back of his skull. Again, laughter boomed through the forest, and fear went through us. Our imaginations conjured nightmarish visions of a monstrous entity just beyond our sight. My heart raced and my mouth grew dry. The creature grew bolder, and it moved closer to our campsite. It rattled trees and snapped branches, causing them to sway and creak. For the first time, we heard heavy footfalls of the creature. As it ran circles around our campsite, whooping and pulling down limbs, the logs Boyd placed in the campsite began to light, and the fire grew from embers to a healthy flame and continued to grow. As the fire grew, our circle of light grew with it. The creature in the forest seemed to back off. We no longer heard the footsteps, and the laughter seemed farther away. The whoops and yells stopped, and then finally the horrible rotten smell was gone. Still, nobody moved. Nobody even spoke, not even when an ember from the campsite jumped onto Boyd's back, and it caught his shirt on fire. We didn't even move when the fire spread to his greasy hair. We all sat in silence, and we just watched him burn. What had I gotten myself into? We broke the silence when the sun came up. Hell of a night, Milton said, crawling out of his tent. He stood up and stretched his hands into the air and yawned. Smells like bacon, doesn't it? Screw you, Eli said. You don't even feel bad, do you? He didn't have to go out there. Milton nudged the corpse with his boot. Boyd's back was charred where the shirt had burnt off, and his hair had completely burned away, leaving a blackened scalp punctuated by a fist-sized rock stuck about 2 inches deep. Well, I'm glad he did, though. I reckon he saved our asses. Eli walked away from the conversation and began packing camp. For the first time since I met him, Ross was silent. I crouched down next to him and softly asked him if he was all right. He looked up at me and said the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising in every time we fall. That's Nelson Mandela. He was going to be okay, I thought. All right, Piggy, Milton called Kenny, who was sitting on a log eating a granola bar. Get packing. We're burning daylight. Go to hell, Kenny replied, taking another bite of his breakfast. Not so fast, my friend, Eli shot back. He held up his cell phone in one hand and he pointed at it with the other. One call, that's all. Don't forget that. And without another word, Kenny stood up and started packing camp. Before we left camp, Eli, Ross, and I had a team meeting, if you could call it that. This campsite would be our meeting point. If any of us got lost or separated, or if Milton went crazy and started attacking people, we would meet back here. Eli also instructed me to lay down the 3 bear traps I brought with me around the campsite. If Bigfoot chased us, maybe we could lead it into one. And if Milton was chasing us, well, we'd get him the same way. We packed our bags and headed off. I followed a few minutes behind after setting the bear trap in our designated spots, and I hurried to catch up. We walked mostly in silence, each of us contemplating the previous 10 hours of our lives. The newfound respect for a creature half of us believed to be myth, the haunting melodies it made, the sickening crack of Boyd's skull splitting. Regardless of how the events of this hunt played out, I think after the first night in the woods, each of us was changed forever. We were scarred by these events, and we would carry that with us for the rest of our lives, however long that may be. I honestly don't know why I stayed after that first night. The money wasn't good enough for the danger. Maybe I was scared to walk back alone. Maybe I'm just a follower and was more comfortable just doing what I was told. I don't know. I think back to the email that started this whole mess. Ross wrote, I know this is a lot to ask of a common man, but maybe you aren't so common after all. I think this was like a once-in-a-lifetime chance at something great, and why not take it? Either I spend the next 40 years of my life taking raccoons and squirrels out of attics, and probably die on the job having never achieved anything. Or, you know what, I take a chance and I die doing something no one has ever done before. Or maybe, just maybe, I survive and I get a hell of a story out of it. Sure, I'll end up being the psycho at the bar raving about Bigfoot, but at least I'll know the truth. Milton seemed to be the only one in a talkative mood, mostly telling everyone how he had Kenny by the balls. Kenny did not say a word the entire time. It was not a fun walk. About 45 minutes after we left camp, the smell hit us again, which finally shut Milton the hell up. Eli silently led us to the mouth of the cave we'd been searching for. The smell. It was insanely powerful. The 5 of us stood there, and the reality of the situation began to dawn on us. None of us had a plan. None of us had experience with anything like this. So what the hell were we doing here? Not a single one among us was some brave explorer, driven by overwhelming curiosity and the promise of discovery. None of us really wanted to be here. One of our party members had already been killed by this creature without us ever laying eyes on it. What the hell did we think we were going to do? Predictably, it was Milton who broke the silence. All right, Piggy, if you go, he whispered and shouted towards Kenny while nodding towards a cave entrance. Kenny calmly walked past Milton and whispered into Eli's ear. Eli's eyes flicked between Kenny, the cave, Milton, and back to the cave again. And then he smiled, and he handed Kenny the shotgun. All right, Piggy, get in the cave, Kenny said, leveling the shotgun at Milton. Not so fast, my friend, Milton began, pulling his phone out of his pocket. One call, and Kenny interrupted him. Like I give a crap. And then smoke belched from the shotgun, and we watched as Milton's hand exploded into a fine red mist. All of us, even Milton, stood in shocked silence, with the exception of Ross, who muttered to himself, "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death." I think I knew that one. That was a Frank Herbert quote. I have to admit, Milton took it like a champ. He didn't scream, but he erupted into a quiet rage like you do when you stub your toe at your girlfriend's parent house. His face twisted in pure agony, and he hopped around in a circle, whispering obscenities. And then he brought the mangled stump that used to be his hand into his gut, and he pressed it to his shirt to try and stop the bleeding. He hopped around a few more times, then regained his composure. "Go to hell, all of you," he said, before heading slowly towards the mouth of the cave. Eli walked over to Kenny, pulled the shotgun out of his hand, and loaded a shell to replace it. Milton stood on the threshold of the cave mouth, and he turned around, and then he turned back into the mouth of a cave and calmly went in. The three of us who remained looked sharply at Kenny, who couldn't seem to take his eyes off the ground in front of him. I think Ross was about to break the silence when we heard from deep in the cave singing. It was Milton, half crying, half singing. "When I got to where I'm going on the far side of the sky," Ross whispered to us then. "Yeah, but he's going to hell, isn't he?" The singing continued. It echoed off the walls of the cavern with an eerie reverb. "I'm going to land beside home." That last exclamation, it was the last we heard of Milton. Instantly, all of us froze in a combination of respect that someone had just walked so calmly to such a grisly death. But also, it was fear that what we had been hunting was now here in front of us. Also, it could probably see us. And then suddenly we could hear it. Loud footfalls and heavy breathing. I slowly started backing away from the cave entrance. Eli and Kenny did the same. Ross stood planted, entranced by the sound of the approaching horror. Eli shouted for him and told him to move, but Ross remained as if his legs were stuck in concrete. And then suddenly, this massive figure emerged from the darkness of a cave mouth. It towered over Ross, who now stood only feet in front of it. It had to have been somewhere between 8 and 10 feet tall. Its massive frame was adorned with thick, reddish-brown hair. Its deep-set yellow eyes were at the same time both intelligent and primal, and it sat in a skull the size of my entire torso. Its arms were long and muscular. Its legs were short and powerful. And of course, its feet were huge. It held one of Milton's arms by the wrist, and was chewing on the bicep. The next part of the story is the most unbelievable part, but I swear to you, this really happened. Scout's honor. The Sasquatch removed Milton's arm from its mouth, looked down at Ross, who was pissing his pants 6 feet in front of the hulking monster, and it said, "What? I swear to you this happened." Now, I don't think the Sasquatch can speak English. I don't think I can understand English either. But I've seen videos of cats that sound like they're saying howdy, and I've seen dogs that sound like they're saying I love you. I mean, just the night before, we heard the Sasquatch mimic 1,000 different creatures while it terrorized our camp. So it's not out of line to think this monster had somehow heard that word before and just randomly decided to mimic it. That specific word, that specific moment. But my God, what bad timing for Ross to hear the beast say that. Ross instantly whipped his head around towards Eli and a "I told you so." Look, a massive grin spread across his face. He craned his neck to look up at the immense creature. He cleared his throat and then said in this ridiculous, vague accent, "Oh, great one of the forest, may I offer you a cigarette?" And then he pulled the cigarette out from his pocket and extended it towards the creature. I could not believe what I was seeing. The hairy colossus gently laid Milton's tattered arm on the ground and gingerly reached out towards Ross's hand, as if he was going to say, "Hey, thanks, I needed a smoke." Ross turned his head toward us again, and I have never seen a smile that wide. The giddiness on his face conjured up images of children at petting zoos who see a llama for the first time and think they're taking part of a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Only in Ross's case, I guess that really was true. Ross cleared his throat once more and said, "Yes, yes, my good friend, would you like to?" And then in a flash, the Sasquatch's arm lashed out and it grabbed Ross's extended arm by the elbow. The only sound Ross had time to utter was a bewildered "huh" before the animal flung him high over his head, down under the rock floor of the cave. There is no doubt in my mind Ross was dead on impact. Blood shot out in every direction, but the brute continued Hulk smashing and rag-dolling the corpse until Eli fired his shotgun. Striking it in the midsection, the giant ape dropped the bloody pulp that had just moments ago been Ross, and it turned its attention on us. The monster looked down, and it placed its huge hands over the small wound the shotgun had made on his stomach, and it pulled it away, revealing a small amount of blood. I think the expression on its face was shocking, but I don't know for sure. Even if the wound was insignificant for a creature of this size, I don't think anyone had ever made it bleed. It bent down and began packing the wound with leaves and dirt, and we took the opportunity to break for the campsite. The three of us tore through the forest as fast as we could. It wasn't long before our legs were burning, and we were gasping for breath, pushing our bodies to their limits under the weight of our large packs. But we kept going. Branches lashed at our arms and faces like whips as we ducked through the thick foliage. It wasn't long before the forest around us shook with this incredible roar, and the chase was on. We could tell from the periodic roars that it was gaining on us quickly. It would catch up to us soon, and we had no chance of winning that fight. I grabbed Eli and Kenny, and I quickly doused us with a bottle of Red Fox urine I'd bought to cover our scent. And then I grabbed a handful of dirt and pine needles, and I began rubbing them all over me, and I told them to do the same. After about a minute of trying our best to cover our scent, I pulled them both into a dense thicket, and I told them to be as quiet as possible. After a few minutes, the rank odor of the Sasquatch returned. Sweat ran down my face, and my heart beat so fast I was afraid it might give me away. I pressed myself deeper into the brush, my body shaking. The scent of damp earth mingled with the aroma of pine, and I prayed to God it would be enough to evade detection. Every fiber of my being focused on keeping still, blending in with my surroundings. I realized that despite the smell getting stronger, we hadn't heard the trademark footfalls. I wondered where it was, and then a heavy shadow passed across our hiding spot. It was in the trees. Its thick, powerful arms carried it from limb to limb. Muscles rippled like waves under its thick coat of matted fur. The creature moved silently, almost gracefully through the woods around us. Stopping from time to time to scan the forest floor and sniff the air, I didn't make a sound. Even as the Sasquatch lingered a few feet above my hiding spot, scanning the area, its intelligent eyes seemed to search every nook and cranny of the forest, and my heart was racing. But luck was with us. As the Sasquatch's attention shifted elsewhere, drawn to a distant sound or scent, it hesitated before turning away and disappearing into the labyrinth of the forest. We sat in the bush for another 30 minutes before letting ourselves breathe a sigh of relief. I had survived our first face-to-face encounter with the Sasquatch, but we still had many miles to go before we reached home. We took a few moments to regain our composure, and then we slowly continued our way to the campsite, careful to keep quiet as we pushed through to our destination. We knew we were getting close when we encountered a smell, not the heavy, rotten musk of the Sasquatch, but the charred and sickly smell of Boyd's burned remains. Eli, the oldest of us, requested a break before we entered our old campsite. I don't think it was to catch his breath as much as it was the fact that he'd lost 2 acquaintances and a family member in the last 10 hours. Going back to the site where the charred remains of Boyd lay, I think it was just too much for him. Especially since we both knew the animals and insects would have started getting deployed by now. I sat on the ground next to Eli, and I rested my hand on his shoulder. We didn't need to speak. I've lost friends and family before, too. Granted, not in ways as sudden and incredibly stupid as offering a Sasquatch a cigarette, but I understood nonetheless. After a few minutes of reflection, Eli and I stood up, dusted ourselves off, and we were ready to continue our journey ahead when we heard Kenny scream. "Help!" he shouted. The bear trap got me. Eli and I both shared a look of regret. With everything we'd gone through since waking up, we'd forgotten about the bear traps, in fairness. It had been a hell of a day. We sprinted to the campsite, and we found Kenny sitting on his ass, his leg caught in the iron grip of the trap. The serrated edges of the trap sank deeper with each of his movements. Blood trickled from the wounded leg in steady streams, staining the ground under him. It was clear his leg was broken in at least one place. Kenny was not going to be walking out of this forest. Eli and I worked to pry the trap open, but each time we pulled at the jaws, Kenny would scream and beg us to stop. After 2 attempts, the heavy musk of the Sasquatch returned. Kenny's eyes grew wide, and he begged us not to leave him. He reached for us as we stood up and backed away. Tears ran down his cheeks. Eli and I again rubbed dirt and pine needles on us, and we jumped into a nearby bush and waited. And it wasn't long before the Sasquatch showed up. Kenny went silent, and he stared at the hulking brute as it approached him. The giant reached out one massive hand and picked Kenny up by the torso. Pinning his arms at his sides, his legs dangled below. One of the legs bent at an awful angle where the bear trap, still attached to the leg, had got him. And Eli and I watched this all from the nearby bush when we realized we'd made a terrible mistake. We were laying on top of a fire ant colony. Searing pain shot up our legs. As the army of ants crawled out of their hive and worked their way from our feet up towards our torsos, the pain was crazy. It took all my willpower not to just scream and brush them off of me. They slowly worked their way up my legs, onto the trunk of my body, and then my back and then my neck. And soon they were crawling into my ears and my nose. My brain was screaming to get them off of me, but Eli and I remained motionless, and I let the swarm of insects just wash over us. The only other choice was death. The Sasquatch, still holding Kenny up with one hand, took his free hand and he placed it over Kenny's head. It closed its fingers around Kenny's head and ripped it upward like it was uncorking a wine bottle. Kenny's head was pulled off effortlessly, and it brought a small section of spine along with it. Kenny never made a sound. The monster dropped both pieces of what was Kenny, and it started sniffing the air, searching. At this point, the fire ants had almost completely covered us. I could feel my skin starting to swell. I took a sideways glance at Eli, and his face was so swollen I could barely recognize him, but we remained absolutely silent. The beast milled around the campsite, playing with its fresh kill. After taking a few generous bites out of the man it had killed the day before, it looked as if it had given up searching the area and was about to leave when the beast stepped into another one of the dormant bear traps. The animal howled in pain and primal rage. The trap didn't slow it down at all, though. The beast pried the trap off of its foot and then snapped it in two, and then, in an awesome show of pure strength, it uprooted a small tree and it broke that in half as well. The animal then began to walk around the campsite, testing its injured foot, puffing and puffing in a blinding rage, periodically beating its chest. After what felt like an eternity, we lost sight of the beast, and eventually the smell was gone. At that point, we felt secure enough to leave the bush. We scrambled out like mad men, jumping around and slapping off the insects as quickly and quietly as we could. Still, neither of us made a sound. We looked like hell, covered from head to toe in dirt, scrapes, bruises, slick in sweat and swollen beyond our recognition. Each step we took was agony, but the worst part was the itching. Our entire bodies itched. We scratched our arms and legs so hard they began to bleed, which just attracted mosquitoes and gnats. I won't lie to you. There were a few times when I contemplated screaming and just letting the beast take me, but I quickly brushed those thoughts aside. One other thing that really sucked. At this point, I had not figured out yet that I probably was not going to get paid for any of this shit. What a kick in the nuts that was. We moved slowly and steadily through the woods, leaving behind the campsite that had become the final resting place for 2 of our party. We didn't talk, and we took short rests often, both to regain our energy and to listen to the woods around us for any sign of the Squatch. We slept that night in a thick bush, taking turns sleeping, so we could wake the other person in case of danger or if they started snoring. We continued on in the morning, dropping unnecessary items from our packs as we traveled. Eli dropped the tent, sleeping bags, and most of the food. I dropped nearly all of my equipment, with the exception of bear mace as the last line of defense and the food and water I would need to stay alive. We moved more quickly than the day before, riding high on adrenaline, and with the hope that we could soon put all of this behind us. We were almost back to Eli's cabin by midday. We were 200 yards from the cabin. When the smell came back, we gathered what little energy we had left, and we sprinted towards the cabin. I could hear the pounding of heavy footfalls behind me. The Squatch was gaining ground fast. Pure adrenaline pumped in my veins. All I could do was focus on the small wooden shack in the distance, getting closer with every step. I wanted to turn around and look, but I didn't. I couldn't afford any wasted movement or energy. I had to focus on the cabin in the distance. All I could hear, it was the sound of two men running through the forest and our own breathing. I immediately knew what had happened. It had taken to the trees. I couldn't resist any longer. I had to look. The terror of anticipating certain death was too much to take. I slowed my pace slightly and I glanced behind me. Nothing. I looked to the left and the right, nothing on either side. I tried looking up in the treetops, but the canopy was too thick to allow me to see more than a few feet high. Eli had pulled ahead of me, and I was focused on his backpack. That was my new target. Catch up to the man in front of me, I thought. Don't be the guy at the end of the line that gets picked off first. I was laser focused on that backpack. My vision narrowed. Everything else in the forest didn't matter. All that mattered was following that ratty JanSport bag to safety. My breathing steadied. The pain in my legs seemed to numb. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Insanely, I thought, wow, so this is what a runner's high is. And then my view was blocked by a giant hairy arm that swooped down in front of me and grabbed Eli's backpack and thrust him up into the air. Eli yelped as he was pulled into the air, legs kicking. Luckily, he was a quick thinker and immediately slipped out of the backpack. He fell about 8 feet back down and crashed onto the forest floor. I stopped to help him up, and we carried on, and the cabin was now about 100 yards from us. 806,040. And then I felt myself being lifted off the ground and immediately trying to slip out of my backpack. But the straps were too tight. I was lifted higher and higher into the trees until I came face to face with what had been hunting us for 3 days straight. Its yellow eyes bore into me from under its protruding and hairy brow, and it opened its mouth, revealing rows of large, flat teeth designed for pulverizing bone. Its terrible breath stung my eyes, and it made them water. The beast took a sharp inhale, and it screamed in my face. I would describe it to you, but I'll just say it blew out both of my eardrums, which instantly made me dizzy, and it made my ears leak a clear fluid. In a dizzy haze, I pulled out my last line of defense, the beer mace, and I unleashed it on my attacker's face. Instantly, the monster dropped me, sending me 30 feet to the forest floor, which pretty much destroyed my left ankle. I remember Eli helping me up and us running the last 40 yards to the cabin. I remember hearing the monster's pain howls and hearing it retch and gasp for breath, but mostly I just remember the pain when we reached the cabin. Eli laid me down on the couch and handed me a shotgun. He then walked over to the fireplace, and he pulled down an assault rifle he had mounted above, as if it was a Christmas wreath. You know how to use it? He asked me, pointing to the shotgun in my hands. I nodded. Eli took cover behind the wall next to the main window and peeked out. I think we'll be all right in here, he said, probably more for his own confidence than mine. I've got enough guns and ammo in here to invade Iraq. I looked around the cabin. He really did. The cabin was decorated in a style I would call prepper chic. There were ammo canisters stacked in one corner, bottles of water in another corner. There were enough canned goods and peanut butter to last a decade, and enough moonshine to get an entire army drunk. If you were ever to have a last stand against a crazed Sasquatch, you could do much worse than Eli Shack. I rolled off the couch, and I crawled my way over to the kitchen where the moonshine was stockpiled. I took a bottle, uncorked it, and I took a couple swigs. It wasn't as good as morphine would have been, but I needed something. Eli looked over at me and smiled. Pretty good, I made it myself. Just don't light up a cigarette now, or it'll have you burping flames. He again peeked out the window. Hey, get away from my truck. He opened fire through the window, screaming like someone who's watched too many war movies but has never been to war. And next I heard the sound of a wrenching metal. No doubt the Sasquatch doing something terrible to Eli's truck. Eli confirmed this a moment later, shouting, Hey, what are you doing to my truck? Eli reloaded, and he kept firing at the beast if he had half-decent aim. That animal should have nearly 30 rounds in it by now, but it was not slowing down in the slightest. And then there was a crashing sound, and broken glass exploded into the cabin. I looked up, and Eli was no longer there. I followed the trail of broken glass, and I found him dead on the other side of the cabin. The Sasquatch had ripped the tire off of his truck and thrown it at him, caving in his chest. Now it was just me and the Sasquatch, and I went over my options. Try to shoot it like Eli, then die. Try to fight it one-on-one like Kenny and Milton, and then die. Try to offer it a cigarette, like Ross, and then die. Hell, Boy didn't even get to lay eyes on it, and he died. I thought back to that night, hiding in a tent, listening to the whoops and hollers of the beast as it ran circles around our camp. I thought of Boyd's body twitching as it lay in the dirt before catching fire as the fire grew that night. The monster had receded deeper and deeper into the woods, and I had my answer. I took several bottles of the moonshine, and I started making Molotov cocktails, sipping as I worked. The entire time I could hear the monster walking circles around a house, grunting and sniffing the air. When I was happy with the fire bombs, I lit a rag on fire with a gas stove. And then I crawled over to the busted window, and I started lobbing them out into the surrounding forest. And then I crawled back over to the kitchen to make more and repeat the process. Now, there isn't a Hollywood ending to this story. I didn't take down the Sasquatch, avenging my fallen comrades. There's no love story. I just did millions of dollars of environmental and property damage. And then when it became too smoky in the cabin for me to breathe, my army crawled out of there. I got into my truck that was still parked there, and I drove away blindingly drunk. Hell, I couldn't even get anyone to believe me. When I drove myself to the nearest hospital, they had me arrested for driving drunk. It was the perfect cherry on top of a shitty weekend, you know. I wish I could say I learned something, that there was some greater message to this story, but I don't think there is. Unless the message is when you're at work, you don't have to answer every email you get. My wife grew up in a town where people kept their doors unlocked. Cookie-cutter houses, manicured lawns, silver minivans adorned with my child are on our student bumper stickers. We've all visited a town like it. Maybe you've lived in a similar town. Maybe you live in one right now. Fairview was a slice of the American middle-class comfort pie. A place where bad things simply did not happen. I never intended to live in such a town, but ended up in one anyway. At the time, I was in my late 20s. I wanted to move to Los Angeles to take one last shot at my childhood dream, a career in screenwriting. But my wife, Melanie, whom I married young, wanted to stay put on the East Coast to be near her parents. After much deliberation, we agreed that we would move to Los Angeles on the condition that first we stay with her parents for 9 months so she could spend quality time with them before heading out west. And think of all the money we'll save not paying rent, she'd said. You won't even have to work full-time. You can just focus on writing. At the end of our lease, we put our furniture in storage, said goodbye to the trendy Brooklyn neighborhood we called home for the past 7 years, and headed to the suburbs. The adjustment at first was surprisingly smooth. With access to a big backyard, a dog to play with, and a car for running errands, I found myself wondering why I'd ever put myself through unair-conditioned subways and high-rent shoebox apartments. But after a few weeks, the rosy newness wore off and was replaced by a vacant malaise. The problem was there was nothing to do in Fairview. Nothing. I longed for Greenwich Village art house movie theaters, Chelsea galleries, hole-in-the-wall restaurants. I even missed sweating on the subway. At least subway sweat was interesting. My boredom was at its worst in the afternoon. With the move, I got a part-time job as a video editor at the local news station. I worked the night shift, which paid well, but meant that I hardly spent any waking hours with Melanie or anyone else for that matter. I thought that solitude would be a fruitful source of writing inspiration, a way to get a head start on a feature script or a TV pilot before we went to LA. But it was not to be. Melanie's mom ran a daycare in their home, meaning that between 3 o'clock and 5 p.m., my prime writing hours, there were 10 to 14 children screaming at the top of their lungs, desecrating my brain space. I suppose I could have gone to a coffee shop or a library to work. But if you give a writer an excuse not to write, he'll take it every time. And so the walks began. Each weekday, after sleeping through the morning and into the early afternoon, I would lace up my Chuck Taylors and venture out into the quiet streets of Fairview. I had nowhere specific to go, and the route I took each day varied. Rain or shine, I explored my new neighborhood, memorizing street names, taking note of new additions being added to houses. I justified the long walks by telling myself they were productive, a time to gather my thoughts and outline screenplays in my head. But they never were. Most days I would just listen to old jazz music, fake smile at the dog-walking neighbors, and count the days until I could get the hell out of the suburbs. One rainy afternoon, I stumbled upon an off-road path. The path ran under a set of towering power lines and seemed to carry on endlessly. I stopped and stared, intrigued. It felt both out of place and right at home, like pimples on a teenager. I looked for signage telling me I wasn't allowed on the path, but it was unmarked, which I took as an open invitation to explore. Anyway, I told myself I could always leave if anyone gave me a hard time. In a move that would haunt me for years to come, I stepped off the pavement onto the gravel. The rocks made a dreamy, satisfying crunch beneath my feet, an audible signifier that I'd crossed over. I started walking, letting the power lines guide me, unsure of where they'd lead. 5 steps onto the path, it was like I'd left Fairview. The sides of the path were damp and muddy. Overgrown weeds stretched up through cracks in the gravel and tickled my exposed knees. The smell of sewage permeated the air, wafting up as if from the earth itself. Mosquitoes nibbled at my ankles. Rodents scurried around and burrowed into the ground, probably to get away from me. But despite its wretched ugliness, I found a path to be quite lovely. Having lived in the city for so long, there was an element of grimy danger to which I'd grown accustomed and, quite frankly, missed. The path filled that void. On the path, I was vulnerable, alert, alive, but mostly I was alone. Yes, there were signs of life on the path. A few torn blankets, some newspapers, a collection of empty icebreakers, gum containers, the big ones that held 100 pieces. There were the remnants of late-night teenage escapades, empty beer bottles, graffiti, manifestos painted on the back of vinyl fences. But I didn't get the feeling that anybody went there during the day. During the day, it was mine. My mud, my overgrown weeds, my sewage smell. The path was freedom. It was liberation. It was an ounce of control in a life that every day felt more and more like it belonged to somebody else. I didn't walk too far down the path that first day. I wanted to leave some mystery for the next trip. The second day, I went a little farther, and even farther than that the third and fourth days. After a week, I walked so far that I came home late for dinner. "Where'd you walk today?" Melanie said. "Around," I said. "Around where?" "You know, the neighborhood." Nothing crazy. One of the most curious features of the path was how it cut straight through Fairview, like an artery. Houses ran parallel to the path, their backyards separated only by a row of fencing. Most of the fences were tall, white, and opaque, but the ones that were short or otherwise see-through offered a rare glimpse into suburban life. Untended sprinklers, bee-infested wooden sheds, neglected swing sets. Sometimes I'd see a housewife through the window, sipping her afternoon wine. Or I'd catch a TV playing Fox News in a sad, empty room. I found it fascinating how some houses, which looked so pristine from the front, appear to be in total disrepair from the back. For every new paint job, there were 10 peeling shingles, 2 cases of stained siding, and a green scummy pool filled with tadpoles. It was as if the residents started refinishing their houses, but ran out of money after the contractors finished the facade. I suppose the owners of the houses figured nobody would ever see the back, because who in their right mind would be walking down this disgusting path and think to look in? I would often catch myself thinking about the power lines themselves, how they blended in like set dressing, despite their vast importance in our everyday lives. Power lines fuel our internet, our televisions, our home security systems. And yet we don't give them a second thought until those comforts are compromised. We don't protect them or cherish them. In most cases, we relegate them to an out-of-the-way spot where we can pretend they don't exist. A spot where anybody with a mind for trouble could tamper with them. The day I saw him started like any other. I got home from work at 4 a.m., slept until 1:30 p.m., ate a little snack, thought about doing some writing, didn't do any writing, then set out for my walk. I had been visiting the path for a month at that point, and summer had begun to turn to fall. Though the path itself was treeless, the people who lived adjacent to it would rake their leaves and throw them over the fence so as to avoid having to bag them. The colorful foliage made my path oh so enchanting and helped mask the smell of sewage. Donning my denim jacket, I strolled the foggy, multicolored wonderland, enmeshed in a childlike sense of belonging. I began to give serious consideration to whether or not I might be better off just staying in the suburbs, staying with my path. But that all changed when I saw a man in the distance. He was dressed in black from head to toe, walking toward me down the path. He had a crooked limp in his left leg, and his shoulder dipped with each step. I felt an immediate sense of dread when I saw him, the kind of lurching repulsion you get when you see a rat scurry across the street. On an animal level, you should avoid it. My first instinct was to turn around and try to get off the path before he caught up. But he'd spotted me already, and to turn away would be a sign of fear. As I drew closer to the mystery man, I realized that he was not wearing black, but rather varying militaristic shades of dark green, as if to camouflage himself. His hair was curly and graying on the sides. He was bald on top. The sewage smell flared up as we approached each other, and continued to grow stronger with each step. He had holes in the knees of his pants, holes in the elbows of his jacket, holes in the top of his shoes. He kept his hands in his pockets, but if he was wearing gloves, I'm sure they would have had holes in them too. And then I saw his face. His face. It was not ugly per se, but there was something off about it, something hard to place. There was the dirt, a layer of sweaty grime that coated his forehead and cheeks and made him look splotchy. But that wasn't it. I'd seen plenty of people in the city, homeless people, construction workers, some far filthier than this mystery man. But none of them had ever possessed such an uncanny quality. No, it wasn't the dirt, nor was it his uneven, bushy eyebrows or his crooked, once broken nose. No, that wasn't it as we moved within talking distance. My heart raced and my fingers went numb. A prickly tingle rushed down my spine, like spiders crawling on my skin. How many times had I walked home alone late at night, crossed under deserted bridges, shared a vacant side street with a stranger? But still, never before had I felt as uncomfortable, as concerned for my safety and well-being, as I did with this man. I wasn't sure if I should make eye contact or pretend he wasn't there. As we crossed paths, I instinctively glanced at him, only to discover that he was looking back at me. Eye contact it was. As a self-defense mechanism, I gave him a nod, an acknowledgement that I could see him and knew his face enough to pick it out of a police lineup. With my nod, the corners of his dry, cracked lips spread into a wide smile. It was then that I realized what gave his appearance that uncanny quality. His teeth, paired with the dirt and grime and torn clothing, was a set of spectacularly white teeth, movie star white. White like the intense ring of light around a solar eclipse. These Cadillac white teeth were out of place on such a disheveled man, as if they'd been stolen from another mouth and implanted in his via black market bathtub surgery. They were a bit large, too, like they didn't quite fit. And while he smiled at me with those porcelain pellets, and I stared back, I heard a small sound that cut through that of the dead leaves and gravel crunching below the man's water-stained boots. It was a kind of rhythmic, sucking pop that, with the motion of his jaw, I recognized as gum chewing. He looked me in the eye for a moment longer, though it seemed like he was looking through me, not at me, popped his gum a few more times, and walked on. I kept walking too, picking up my pace and trying not to make it obvious that I was peeking back over my shoulder. When I did catch a glimpse of the man, he was about 100 feet away and showed no signs of slowing. With my second glance, he faded into the horizon. Alone again on the path, and once again feeling safe, I let out a loud, relieved laugh. How paranoid I'd been to suspect that man. How judgmental. Yes, he was dirty, and his teeth were a bit odd, but all he was doing was taking a walk, same as me. And since when was that a crime? He was probably just as afraid of me as I was of him. And there I was, standing around, laughing to myself like a lunatic. I wiped a silly tear of relief from my eye. This town, I reminded myself, nothing bad ever happens in this town. Weeks passed, and I continued my walks down the path, switching out my denim jacket for a winter coat and my favorite orange beanie. I didn't see the man again, but a few new gum containers, which I figured probably belonged to him, did appear during that time. I spent Thanksgiving and Hanukkah down in Florida with my parents. The warm weather and pastel scenery was a welcome change from the dreary northeastern cold. But after 3 days of my mom telling me about her friend's son, who worked in finance and how he might be able to connect me to a higher-paying job, I found myself missing Fairview. As soon as I got back, I took a nice long stroll. Melanie took 3 weeks off around the holidays, one last hurrah where the family could all be together uninterrupted by work. This vacation put her at home during the daytime when I would normally go walking. While I was thrilled to finally spend some time with her, I couldn't help but feel each day was incomplete without my walk of solitude. There were a few afternoons when I was able to convince her to go on walks with me, but Melanie was quick to complain about the cold and we ended up cutting the walk short. "Why don't we just go home and have hot chocolate instead?" Melanie would say. We celebrated Christmas on the night of the 24th. It was a cozy evening filled with laughter and good food. We all wore pajamas and opened presents at midnight. Melanie's parents bought me a new pair of boots. "We know how much you like to walk," Melanie's father said as I tried them on. Since we'd celebrated the night before, the plan for Christmas Day was to go out to a movie and eat Chinese food. Having grown up in a Jewish household, this made me feel right at home. Melanie's family even let me pick the movie. We woke up late, cleaned up any leftover mess from the night before, and had a leisurely breakfast. The weather was warm for Christmas Day, hovering in the low 40s. An intermittent drizzle fell throughout the morning and coated the landscape in gray. Had we not purchased our movie tickets in advance, the weather may have been enough to keep us home. As we navigated the neighborhood in Melanie's parents' minivan, a blue light obscured by rain and fog appeared in the distance. "What's that?" I said. "What's what?" Melanie replied, craning her head. She squinted. "Looks like a police car. Maybe it's the Santa thing." "Santa thing," Melanie's dad said. "It's what you've seen, Dad, every year. The thing where the police drive the guy in the Santa costume and he hands out the candy canes. Isn't that the fire department?" I said. Melanie shrugged. We pulled up and a scene came into view. The light was not coming from a single police car, but many. They were parked in a line down the street. I counted 8 in total, all of the SUV variety. A brigade at the end of the line of cars were 2 ambulances. The car in front of us slowed down, presumably out of curiosity, which gave us a chance to take a look as well, halfway up the block. There was a house surrounded by yellow police tape. A few police officers stood on the lawn, trekking across the wet grass and pulling up mud with their boots. One of the officers had a clipboard in his hands and was taking notes while another pointed at the grass and spoke. Having watched so many movies, the demeanor of the police officers surprised me. I was used to fast-talking cops with sharp haircuts who had all the right moves. But these cops were the opposite of that. They looked uncomfortable, timid, unsure of their actions. One in particular, a young cop younger than me, probably no older than 25, looked pale, green, and a little nauseous. His cheeks were puffy and damp, as if he'd been crying. He stood with his hands in his pockets and rocked gently back and forth on his heels, keeping his red eyes trained on the ground. When the front door opened, the car in front of us stepped on the brakes to watch. We were on a narrow one-lane RD, so we had to stop as well. 2 paramedics emerged from the door, wheeling out a body draped in white cloth. After a few feet, the wheel of the gurney got stuck in a deep groove on the sidewalk. The paramedics counted to 3 in unison, then lifted the gurney to get it moving again. The cloth-wrapped body looked a little half-sized. Feeling guilty about gawking, I turned my head away from the scene and caught a glimpse of the neighbors across the street. They were out on their front porch, reclining in lawn chairs, watching the drama unfold. They had Santa hats on their heads, beers in their hands, and looks of giddy fascination on their faces. Whatever unfortunate event was taking place had turned into a spectator sport. The front door of the house burst open again. This time, rather than medical or police professionals, a lone woman stumbled out. She looked to be in her mid to late 30s. Her curly brown hair was a mess, and one sleeve of her salmon-colored nightgown was slipping down to reveal a freckled shoulder. She'd clearly been crying. The woman took a few dizzy steps, then started running after the paramedics, her bare feet slapping against the paved walk-up. As the paramedics loaded the body into an ambulance, the woman tripped over her feet and dropped to her knees on the wet lawn. "No, no, don't take him," she cried, throwing her arms out and bending at the waist as if in prayer. The paramedics shut the door of the ambulance, and the woman, too distraught for words and now choking on her own spit, began letting out a throaty, animalistic keening. Even though the car window was closed, I could hear how violent the sound was, how much it was shredding her vocal cords. The paramedics drove away, and the woman went limp, flopping down the grass and lying face down. A sad-looking man with hunched shoulders and an unstylish mustache came out of the house and peeled a woman off the ground. The front of her gown was soaked through and stuck to her breast and abdomen as they rose and fell with each desperate breath. I was called in to work that night. It was Christmas, but if you work for the news, you work when there's news. It was my assignment to cut together the segment about the house with a weeping woman, making me both the editor and a primary source there, working late into the night in a closet-turned-editing room. I learned what had really happened. The story revolved around a married couple who, in the continued pursuit of anonymity, I will refer to as Jeff and Stephanie Sarkop. Like Melanie and me, Jeff and Stephanie had spent their 20s in the city. He worked as an analyst for a mid-sized investment company, and she worked as a secretary for a since-dissolved PR firm. They met at a bar on the Lower East Side and fell in love instantly. After dating for a couple years, they tied the knot with a modest but charming wedding in Cape Cod. They moved shortly thereafter. 11 months after the move, they welcomed their first and only child, Ethan, into the world. In the almost decade since Ethan's birth, Jeff and Stephanie had slid comfortably into the Little League's coaching, crustless sandwich-making life of suburban parents. Ethan, a chipper if not slightly hyperactive 9-year-old, was a Christmas fanatic. Along with his favorite holiday pastimes were decorating the tree, going to see the Rockets at Radio City Music Hall, and making hand-drawn cards for his parents. But his favorite tradition, without fail, was sleeping downstairs on the couch on Christmas Eve in the hopes of meeting Santa Claus. Each year, he would stay up as late as he could, only to awake the next morning and find that he had just missed the big man in red. Nevertheless, he always tried. The year that I discovered Ethan, he'd staved off sleep until 12:15, a new record, before he finally succumbed to exhaustion, shut his little eyes and dozed off. Once Ethan was asleep, Jeff and Stephanie tiptoed into the living room and slid Santa's presents under the tree. Jeff took a few bites off the carrots Ethan had left for Rudolph, and Stephanie nibbled the cookies and sipped the milk. They went upstairs, got in bed, and fell asleep to an episode of Criminal Minds. When they awoke at 11 a.m. the next morning, having gotten their best and most complete night of sleep in 10 years, Jeff and Stephanie knew something was wrong. Normally, on Christmas morning, Ethan would have woken them at the crack of dawn, buzzing with excitement over Santa's visit, but they hadn't heard a peep from him. They got out of bed and walked downstairs, both secretly praying that they would find Ethan sitting crisscrossing applesauce next to the Christmas tree, surrounded by wrapping paper, playing with one of his new presents. But upon entering the living room, Jeff and Stephanie discovered a bizarre scene. Gone were the cookies, the milk, the carrots. Gone were the stockings, the ornaments, the presents they had left under the tree. And most noticeably, gone was their son. The only Christmas-related items left in the room were the naked fir tree, and beneath the tree, a single unfamiliar gift-wrap box, a box which neither Jeff nor Stephanie had placed there. Nobody knows how they reacted, not even Jeff or Stephanie, who were so rattled by what came next, that they explained it to the police 3 times differently with each telling. But since I've now had some time to think it over, I've taken the liberty to imagine how the events of the morning might have transpired. Picture, if you will, Jeff and Stephanie standing dumbfounded at the base of the stairs, each waiting for the other to take initiative and make a move. Stephanie places an open hand on her chest. Jeff curls his big toe inside of his fraying cotton slippers. Finally, unable to bear the silence, Stephanie mumbles, "Should we open it?" "Yeah," Jeff says, his voice cracking. Jeff takes a step forward towards the tree, his mustache fluttering with each nervous breath. He reaches the tree and wraps his plump fingers around the edge of the box. He picks it up, surprised by its heft. Giving the box a timid shake, Jeff turns and looks back at Stephanie, whose fingers have moved from her chest to her mouth as she gnaws off her candy cane patterned nail polish. She gives Jeff a nod, as if to say, "Continue." Jeff unties the bow and peels off the wrapping paper with neat and unnecessary precision. He folds the discarded wrapping paper into a small square and places it down next to the box. Jeff opens the lid. For a moment he smiles, relieved at the sight of his son staring back up at him. Oh, there's Ethan, he thinks to himself. We had nothing to worry about. But his smile fades as Jeff realizes that there is nothing but air in the space between the ground and the box in his hands. "What is it?" Stephanie says. Jeff doesn't answer. "Babe, what's—" "Say something, Jeff." Jeff turns to Stephanie. It's... Jeff starts, unable to finish the sentence. Jeff reaches into the box and grabs Ethan, pulling him out by the hair. Stephanie shrieks and collapses to the ground. Jeff, startled by Stephanie's reaction, drops Ethan's small head. It rolls a couple of feet, smudging semi-dry blood across their Tuscan yellow IKEA carpet. Jeff vomits, and Stephanie screams again. And she keeps screaming without pause until a few hours later, when I see her through the window of Melanie's family's minivan. At around 4 a.m., my boss popped his head into the editing room. He was wearing a Santa hat and strap-on beard. His eyes were bloodshot tired. "You can go home if you want." He slurs. "I know this is supposed to be your day off. I don't mind. I'm almost done anyway." I say. "All right," he says. "Well, there's some more eggnog in there." He burps and pats his chest. "In the break room. You want me to get you some?" "Sure," I say. "Copy." He walked out of the room, and I looked back to the screen. Alone again, I began second-guessing my decision to stay. I just reached the part of the story where the reporter is talking about the police finding the rest of Ethan's body in the fireplace, and I couldn't help but wonder if so much negativity was bad for my mental health. My boss returned a minute later and handed me a cup of eggnog. I thanked him, took a swig, and got back to work. After another hour of editing, I finished the segment. I was about to hit the export button, but decided that this piece, this subject matter, deserved one last watch-through for mistakes. I hit the space bar, and the video began. It played as expected, shots of police lights bouncing off a freshly painted siding, our local reporter on the scene, interviews with the neighbors, beers in hand. I hate to see it, but it was some of my finest editing work. I couldn't help but admire how compelling the story was, how much it drew me in, made me want to invest my time. Near the end of the video, I noticed that I'd forgotten to include a Ken Burns effect on a photo of the Sarkov house. I paused on the image and had just begun rendering the effect when a small black line in the upper right-hand corner of the frame caught my eye. At first, I thought it might have been some dirt or maybe a crack in the screen. I reached out and tried to scrape it off with my fingernail, but the surface was smooth and unblemished. I zoomed in on the black line, and it grew larger. Up close, I could see that it was three-dimensional, rounded out, receiving light from the same source as the rest of the house. It was part of the image. I stare at the pixels, trying to make sense of this strange charcoal sky spaghetti. And then I recognized it. The angle, the placement, the gentle curve. It was a power line, running parallel to the Sarkov house, lurking just barely in the distance. I hit the export button and waited in silence. The moment the video finished, I grabbed my coat, put on my orange beanie, and headed for the exit. On the way out the door, I heard my boss say, "Merry Christmas." I rode my bike at a rapturous pace from the studio to town. The freezing winter air bit my face. Watery, clear mucus ran down from my nose to my upper lip and filled my tongue with a taste of salt. The roads, lit by a subtle green and red glow of Christmas lights, were eerie and desolate. I had a tight feeling in my stomach, a crocheting of my innards that reminded me I was riding into trouble. I cruised past Melanie's house. The light was off in her window, our window. I worried that the loud clicking of my poorly lubricated bike chain might wake the family dog, but I made it past the house without a single bark onward. I rode my normal walking route, which seemed shorter and less interesting on a bike. The sun had just begun to rise when I arrived at the power line path, though it hadn't yet reached the horizon, leaving the landscape stark and blue. The leafless trees hung over the scene, ominous and dark. The gravel on the path was too loose and rough to ride over, so I climbed off my bike and hid it behind a wild pine bush. Then, with my body shaking from a combination of cold and nerves, I set off down the path on foot one last time. I observed the familiar details and noted how they'd changed in my 2-week absence. The frozen ground, the mud, the erratic arrays of garbage and abandoned clothing. The differences were slight, but felt. I looked at the houses. Plumes of smoke drifted out of a few chimneys. Some houses appeared more run down than they had just a couple of weeks before. A reminder that our protection from the elements is a thin and flimsy comfort. I thought about the people inside the houses who hadn't yet heard the news. How, in just a short time, a TV report would dismantle their sense of safety and comfort forever. I walked down the path looking for that vague something, a hint, a clue, an indication that I wasn't wasting my time. And then I found it. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a flash of an unnatural yellow color next to one of the houses. It took a moment, but I recognized it as police tape, a dead giveaway that I was looking at the house that belonged to Jeff and Stephanie Sarkop. There it was, standing cold and empty, tragic in its plainness. Had it not been for the police tape, I never would have noticed it. An old cracked kiddie pool in the backyard, an expensive swing set that didn't look like it got used much. It could have been any house in town. Except it wasn't any house. It was a house of horror, a new Amityville, a place where future generations of teenagers would go on Halloween to test how brave they were, then laugh about it later. The house was separated from the path only by a low chain-link fence. The blinds were open and the lights were on, giving me a clear view into the living room. I could see a few framed photos, the Christmas tree, the couch where Ethan would have slept. The life of the Sarkobs was there on display, available for me or anybody else who had ever stood in this spot on the path and felt compelled to look. A chill ran through my body, and I took a step backward. Something hard crunched under my foot and made me jump. I looked down. It was just one of those empty icebreaker gum containers. I went to kick it out of the way, but stopped before my foot made contact. I'd broken the container when I stepped on it, and now a lightning bolt-shaped crack ran down the base to the lid, and through that crack I could see the faint outline of something round and oblong inside. It was pale in color and about the size and shape of a battery. Too big to be a piece of gum. I picked up the container and gave it a little shake. The mystery object made a soft, dull thudding sound as it knocked against the inner plastic walls. I slid my finger under the lid and flicked it open. The first thing I saw was the nail, chipped like driftwood and yellowing at the edges. The skin was pale and purplish and loose around the knuckle. The bone stuck out at the bottom, where a small amount of blood was smeared against the plastic. I let the container fall from my hand, then dropped to my knees and dry heaved. The taste of eggnog was faintly present on the base of my tongue. I grabbed a handful of gravel and held it tight, bracing for violence. When the nauseous feeling passed, I tilted my head up and stared at the rest of the gum container scattered across the ground. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. I grabbed another one and flipped it open, and like the first, there was a finger, a thumb this time. Frantically, I opened the rest. I counted as I went, 3, 4, 5, 6. I just finished counting the final container, number 11. When I heard the faint sound of a leaf crunching underfoot behind me, I froze like a possum, foolishly playing dead in broad daylight with my back turned to my would-be attacker. There was total silence for a moment. Then, popping sound. It was a sound I'd heard just once before, but that had ingrained itself into my DNA like a fear of spiders or snakes. The popping sound continued, chewing on his gum. I turned my head slowly, looking back over my shoulder, just far enough to catch a glimpse of his gleaming white teeth. And then I took off. I ran with the fear of God, or worse, pushing me forward. I ran like I hadn't since high school gym class, sprinting, my legs getting ahead of my body, arms flailing to maintain balance. My beanie flew off, but I kept going, not even thinking to look back. Finally, after what felt like 30 miles, I hit the main road. It was the end of the path where the power line split off to carry electricity to the next town over. Wheezing from the cold air that punished my lungs, I bent at the waist and looked back behind me. There was no sign of the man with a pristine smile, only the path, darting straight into the distance, disappearing into the single vanishing point that was Fairview. It took me an hour to get back to Melanie's house. The path, it turned out, was the only direct route from where I was to her neighborhood, so I had to walk down the main road and loop all the way around town. By the time I got home, the house smelled like coffee, a sign that Melanie and her parents were awake. Melanie was sitting at the kitchen table, reading a book. Her mom was cooking behind her. "Are you just getting home from work now?" Melanie said, flipping a page. She looked up over the edge of her book, and I could tell from the change in her expression that I must have looked terrible. "Why?" I started, but then lost the breath in my chest. She looked down at my wet, mud-coated boots. The same boots her parents had gifted me less than 48 hours prior. "Hon, you okay?" My knees buckled and I lowered myself to the ground. By the time Melanie reached me, the tears had already started. "What's wrong?" She kept asking, but I was crying too hard to answer. Her mom got me a glass of water, and after 20 minutes I was able to talk. I told Melanie the whole story, the walks, the path, the man with the white teeth. When I finished, Melanie sat there in silence. "Why didn't you talk to me about this?" she said after an eternity. I shook my head and just looked down at the ground. "I don't know," I said. Melanie took a deep breath and bit her lip. She looked up at the ceiling, her eyes glistening in the overhead lighting. "I think you should call the police," she said. The police sent a team to the path to look for evidence. They brought in UV lights, DNA experts, and dogs trained on Ethan's scent. They sent a helicopter to do a flyover on the entire area, but they found nothing. The scene, it seemed, had been wiped clean. They brought me into the station a few days later for official questioning, but I was cleared right away, my alibi confirmed by Melanie and her family. As news of my findings spread, somebody from the police leaked it. Outrage grew among the public that the police had failed to sweep the scene properly. How could they have missed it? Was the question everybody kept asking. How come they didn't take a closer look at that path? But to me, the answer was simple. They missed the path because they didn't think to look. To the people of Fairview, police included, the path was an ugly blemish, an unsightly oozing wound that was easier to ignore to the point of infection than confront. To them, the path did not exist. And why would they look at something that wasn't there? Time passed uneventfully after that. A slew of first sale signs popped up around town in the weeks and months following the murder, but there were no additional incidents. Personally, I felt fortunate to have come out of the whole thing unscathed. Yes, there were the recurring night terrors about my teeth falling out, and I would sometimes have trouble breathing when passing by packets of gum for sale at the supermarket, but that mostly went away with time after our 9 months in the town were up. Melanie and I packed our life into a U-Haul, drove across the country, and moved into an apartment in the Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles. She spent her days working remotely from home, and I spent mine trying to write screenplays at a coffee shop on Sunset Boulevard. After a full year, I was able to piece together a presentable script, a hard-boiled serial killer mystery, nothing groundbreaking. I sent letters to agents and managers all over town and heard back from only 2, both of whom informed me that, for legal reasons, they weren't allowed to accept unsolicited material. I started going for long drives during the day, wasting large amounts of money on gas to see how far I could get into the desert and still make it home in time for dinner. Sometimes I imagine myself driving into Death Valley, until the sun melted the car and I became one with the sand. One evening, after driving all the way to Primm, Nevada and back, I found Melanie sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes wet, tears drizzling down her cheeks. "What's going on?" I said. She looked up at me and said the thing that had been on both our minds for the past few months. "I don't like it here and I want to go home." We ran out our lease, packed a U-Haul and went back to her family's house in Fairview, completing our extended cross-country trip. I returned to my job at the new station. It was like we'd never left and nothing had changed. One day, on a whim, I decided to go for a walk. I perused the neighborhood, letting my feet guide me. It was winter again, and the Christmas decorations were out in full force. After a series of random turns and curves, I found myself facing a familiar street, a street that led to a familiar path. Fear ran through me like an acid flashback, but still I was drawn to it. I took a step forward and walked toward the path. When I arrived at the entrance, I was both relieved and disappointed to find that the town had put up a metal gate blocking off the path. The gate featured 2 steel locks and 3 no trespassing signs. So that's that, I thought. I turned to walk away, but stopped as an image popped into my mind. Wheels, spokes, handlebars, an under-lubricated chain. I figured that the bike wouldn't still be there, but it was worth checking. I walked around a pine bush, and sure enough, there it was, dirty and rusted, but still in good enough condition that I might be able to sell some parts and recoup a bit of the money I'd blown on the move. I dug the deflated wheels out of the grooves in the ground, into which they'd sunk. As I pulled the bike away from the bush, a piece of orange fabric fell off one of the handlebars. I bent down to pick it up, and I froze when I realized what it was. My beanie, which I had not seen since it had fallen off my head, was as bright and orange as the day I bought it. I pinched the fabric between my fingers. It was soft and clean and smelled of laundry detergent, not at all the condition in which one would expect to find a piece of clothing that had spent almost 2 years outside in the Northeast. I turned my head and let the bike fall to the ground. The frozen bell clanked as it impacted an above-ground root. The wind blew, and my body shook. I was suddenly cold, colder than hail, colder than night, colder than vast and empty space. My teeth chattered and knocked against the inside of my skull. Hands shaking, I pulled the beanie onto my head and crossed my arms for warmth, and there I stood, freezing and alone, looking over my shoulder in a town where bad things just don't happen. Back in October of last year, I applied for a job as a hotel bellboy, and the interview came with some peculiar rules. I'd been laid off in August, like many others, and this opening came up in passing during a conversation at a bar. I was camping on a college friend's couch at 22. We decided to meet his girlfriend to get out of the house and have a drink with her old sorority sisters. The term outdoor in 50% capacity had been stretched to its limit in Hoboken. The only real change since the pandemic was that no one could sit at the bar, and they put less tables on the floor, meaning seating was cramped. That's how I met Catherine. In the commotion, my group rushed to find seats with some friends we already knew. Catherine had been talking to my friend Jill when everyone scrambled to make room for us, and she hesitated to move during the seating shuffle. When everyone was settled, my roommate had stolen Jill away to another table, and Catherine was trapped with us. Catherine was a pretty blonde girl with big brown eyes and definitely one of Jill's sorority sisters. While conversation kicked up for our group, Catherine was quiet, obviously feeling kind of awkward and excluded. I guess she only really knew Jill, so I struck up a conversation with her to be polite. Of course, there's a limited number of topics that strangers are comfortable having with each other at first. Inevitably, I asked her what she did for a living. "I work at the Magnum," she said, as if I'd know what that was. To be fair, most of my friends who'd taken up business degrees and gotten jobs as analysts of some kind answered the question the same way. My biology major didn't lend itself to company names when I asked. She explained it was a luxury hotel in the city. "I thought hotels weren't doing so well right now," I said. "It's the type of place with clients rich enough to rent out floors for 6 weeks," Catherine explained. "We kind of don't worry about rotating traffic. Pays well. Tips are pretty good too. The biggest problem is the short staff since, the giant unemployment elephant in the room all of us young workers refused to acknowledge hovered wordlessly between us." I spent the rest of the night talking to her about hockey, latching onto the fact that she was a Devils fan. I didn't really get desperate enough to consider hotel service until a month later, when my already pathetic savings had dwindled to almost nothing and none of my other prospect had panned out in my field. I was staring down my last can of tuna, and though Brian hadn't asked, I knew I should be paying rent or moving out by now. I wasn't going to move in with my asshole dad, and my mom just sold her house to pay for her own hospital expenses. Any money would do. I decided to take a chance and text Catherine, hoping she wouldn't be offended that this was the first time I was reaching out to her since we met. I got an automatic message back that I was texting a landline. I half assumed then that she gave me a fake number, one off from her cell or something. Part of me found that amusing. I called it, half expecting an automatic machine to tell me I'd connect to the moon in the rejection system. This would be a funny little anecdote to tell Jill if that was the case, and maybe a little concerning for my social skills. But no, 2 rings in. Catherine picked up. "Hello." "Oh, hi," I said, stilted, shocked. She was actually on the other side. "Catherine. This is Catherine, right?" Right about then, I realized I didn't remember her last name from the bar the other night for Jill Delaney's sorority sister reunion. "It's Jessie, by the way. Smooth as sandpaper." "Yes, I remember." "You all right over there, Jessie?" "Yeah, I just didn't expect you to answer a landline, right?" She said sheepishly. "I forgot that. They don't really let us use cell phones here, so I kind of fell into the habit of giving people my work phone." "Sorry, you can call me Kat, by the way." "Kat." Okay, you're working. I can call back or you can call me back. Or I heard myself making a bigger deal out of a simple question than it should be. I had a question about your job, if you were still hiring. I mean the Magnum, like if it was still hiring. I was listening to myself nervously rattle off nonsense, wondering why I wasn't dropping dead from mortification yet. Somehow, after that mess, Catherine didn't immediately hang up. She even told me she'd asked the manager about potential openings. I didn't hear anything for 2 days after that and had almost forgotten about it when my friend Brian dropped a manila envelope on my lap. It was addressed to me, though I usually had my mail forwarded to my mom's in South Jersey. But there it was. When I opened it, there was a little introductory letter to me in type and textured paper. Dear Jesse Fox, your interest in joining the Magnum's hospitable team. We have been referred to and believe that it may fit the goals of our hotel. We would like to extend an invitation to conduct a formal interview and further discuss your skills and qualifications in relation to further opportunities. Please arrive at the following address at no later than 10 a.m. sharp on Saturday, October 10, 2020. Before your interview, please be sure to study the following rules before arriving and to come prepared. Number 1, if you arrive by car, you may park on the east lot in any blue space. Do not park in the white or reserved spaces. These are for guests. Number 2, you will enter through the eastern entrance. An eagle in the bronze filigree on the door is the correct entrance should you not notice any signs. Number 3. If the door is open, walk in and proceed to step 3A. Number 4, if the door is closed, walk around to the south side entrance marked with a decorative woman and proceed to step 3B. Number 5, please bring a printed copy of your resume. If you have arrived through the situation described in 2A, hotel staff will be there to greet you. Give the blonde attendant your coat and hat and other personal belongings, if you have either. And deposit any electronic devices on your person into the bin sitting on the accent table beside the mirror. If you have arrived through the situation described in 2B, you will be alone. Place your electronic devices likewise in a bin on the nearest accent table without a mirror in front of it. Leave your personal belongings, including purses, handbags, backpacks, timekeeping devices, wallets, keys, papers, notebooks, books, pens, pencils, and hats on a chair beside the table. You may proceed with your coat. Number 6. Proceed to room 002N on the map provided. Please take the time to memorize both routes. You shall not be permitted to speak to staff or guests under any circumstances. Do not interact with the staff or diverge from the most direct route possible. 7. When arriving, knock twice. Enter when you hear 2 knocks and return. If you arrived in situation 2A, described above, sit in the chair to the left. If you arrived in situation 2B, described above, sit in the chair behind the desk of your interviewer. In the unlikely event that all chairs are filled, stand in the left-hand corner. In the unlikely event that there is only one chair, stand in the left-hand corner. Number 9. If it is only you and the interviewer, you will introduce yourself first with the following phrase. What a swell day it is to be out yonder. Lovely to meet you. I'm your full name. Hear about the position. If you entered through the situation described in 2B, however, you may introduce yourself as you please. Number 10. If there is anyone else in the room, you are to wait to be spoken to. If there is a woman in the room wearing green or a man with a feather in his breast pocket, do not speak to them no matter what they say to you. If there is a man in the room with a hat, look immediately to the floor and do not look up at him for the remainder of the time he's in the room. If there is a man wearing red in the room, do not say nor confirm your full name throughout the duration of the interview. When asked to speak in this group, the phrase you will say and turn to your interviewer. It's a pleasure to meet you as well. I am excited for this opportunity to become a part of the Grand's illustrious team. Number 11. The interview will be conducted at this time. Answer honestly all questions, barring the caveats mentioned above. Number 12. You are not to leave the room until dismissed. Number 13. Upon leaving, you will wait for any women in the room to stand and exit first. Do be sure to stand if they rise from their seats and return to your seat when finished. If the man with a feather in his breast pocket is in the room, you will wait for him to dismiss you before leaving. Number 14. When exiting, you will leave through the east side entrance, and number 15 discuss this list with no one. We're excited to meet you. Call with any questions or clarifications. I looked at the rules and flipped to the other pages in this packet. There was a map of the parking lot and first floor, contact information, clothing requirements, and an old-fashioned brochure listing benefits, responsibilities, and average salary of a bellboy, which was too good for what I expected to be a minimum wage experience. I think I'm being pranked, I told Brian, letting him read over the rules. Brian laughed and told me to toss it in the garbage or just frame it. It was garbage. Yeah, but I knew the only person who would have tailor-made this garbage for me. I was flattered. Really. This was pretty elaborate, and I'll admit it was very detailed down to the weathered look of the floor map. I went to text Kat, then remembered I still didn't have her cell. I called the landline instead to say thanks for the prank gift. I didn't send you anything, Kat said, sounding genuinely surprised. I thought it was funny, Kat. The rules list is kind of just dramatic, don't you think? Rules. The cat sounded confused over the phone, and then laughed. All right. I forgot how weird they are when you start this job. What? I didn't send you anything, Kat said again. All I did was mention you to my manager. Lied a bit. Said you had some experience in hospitality. It's not like this job is demanding. He asked for your name and address, and I know you live with Jill's boyfriend, so easy enough. Your name is Jesse Fox, right? Yeah, he sent you a package, right? Lots of weird rules. If it is only you and the interviewer, you will introduce yourself first with the following phrase. What a swell day it is to be out yonder. I read dramatically. Yep, Kat said, laughing a little. You're actually supposed to follow them. Seriously, I'm not going to remember all this trash, I said. Not without a checklist or something. Hold on, Kat hung up, and she didn't call back in a few minutes. She didn't call back until the next day. Hey, Jesse, Kat said. So I asked around, and I was right. You don't have to worry. It's always the same. The rules are overcomplicated. If you want, I can go over them with you. But essentially, you're supposed to follow the 2B rule set. That's it. Yeah. I felt the biggest weight lift off my chest then, thinking of having an income again. If these people wanted me to sing and tap dance, I'd learn the choreography fine. At the end of the day, I'd have the job, and it's easier to hire someone than fire them. If this was all just a complicated hazing fine, I asked Kat directly what lines I had to know for my play act of an interview. She started listing them off casually, but then sort of petered off. If you don't think you'll have it by Saturday, Kat said a little hesitantly, I can come over and help you go over it. I grimaced. She was inviting herself over. The cat seemed sweet, and I wanted to think of it as a kind gesture, but this felt a little too above and beyond. I held the phone to my chest, panicking, looking for Brian to hiss my concerns at, but he was off at the gym. Suggest somewhere public, I thought to myself. How about we talk it over? Like the park instead? Tomorrow? When you get off work? I'm off at 6 tomorrow, actually. It'll be dark by then, I thought. Well, there's a coffee house nearby. We could meet at the Green. She agreed, and I hung up feeling pretty good about relocating it to somewhere impersonal. Brian laughed at me when I told him later, and I realized I probably made it sound like a date. Shit, the not date review of the rules was actually not as bad as I thought it would be. Kat seemed truly eager to get down to the business regarding what to do and when. She kept the list in her hand and made me recite each step. We ignored all the caveats and kept to the bare necessities of the path she and the other employees went through. And after you leave your stuff in the bin, but the jacket I can take. I chime in. When you get inside the room and sit in the back chair, you'll say it's a pleasure to meet you as well. I'm excited for this opportunity to become a part of the Grand's illustrious bullshit team. Catherine smiled wide, observing me with wide brown eyes. You're hired, she teased. I felt pretty all right about Saturday. The attire required was another hurdle, but not as bad as the others. Black pants, black shirt with a collar, black shoes, red tie. I had some slacks for my graduation and borrowed the shirt from Brian. Jill and I found a tie for $1 at a thrift store. I took the subway into the city and made it to the Magnum at around 9:50. As Kat had promised, the east entrance was closed, which meant I was going around to the south entrance. The building itself looked like any other hotel I'd seen in the city. Tall stone structures with filigree and crests that added some extra air of importance to the structure's existence. To add to that, it was right across from the park, but only 4 blocks from a Chipotle. Nothing in the city is above being neighbors with convenient fast food. Before I even got inside, however, everything kind of went sideways. The east side entrance was closed as it was supposed to be, but so was the south side door. The filigree of a woman stared back at me, refusing to budge. This was the south side. This was the door I was supposed to walk through. But I pulled on the handle, and it didn't open. I knocked and waited. No one came. I rushed immediately back to the east side door, half dreading that it was the open one. If that was the case, I was screwed. I only knew the rules for the B scenarios. But when I tried that door, it was just as locked as the other. The hell? I walked around the street looking for another entrance, but couldn't find one. It was soon 10:05, and I was wondering if something had gone wrong. So I did the only thing I could think of. I called Kat. She answered quickly enough. What do you mean the door's closed? Kat snapped. It's Saturday, isn't it? Yeah, it is. You're supposed to be here. I saw it on Robert's schedule. Hey, hold on, I'm coming down. Just go to the east side of the building and walk past the door into the alley. There's an employee entrance there. I can let you in. Just wait there. She hung up on me, and I practically sprinted back around a wide building. The alley she was talking about was the odd backing to an otherwise opulent building. The walls were flat, the dumpsters crowding both sides and half open, reeking with garbage. Even in the middle of morning, it was dark in that little crack of space. The door Kat mentioned was a bland gray door that looked severe and functional, completely detached from the gaudy facade that decorated the front. I paced up and down the chipped asphalt, dodging the glass chips and piles of crates. Then the white door opened and I turned at attention. But it wasn't Kat at the door. What you doing here, kid? You lost? A man asked. He wore a trim red and black uniform and a little name tag that said Eddie instinctively. I would have answered no and babbled about being here for an interview, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be back here. This was off the interview script, and if this was my only entrance, I couldn't be shooed away from it. I am the new guy. G. Rob told me to come in this way today, I said, boldly dropping the name I heard Kat use. But I made an awkward gesture toward the door, trying to convey going through and hoping vague complications seemed like an understandable enough barrier. Oh, he said, seeming to think my uncertainty was warranted. His thin lips pressed together tight, and he gave me an odd kind of look. He may have wanted to say something, but instead quickly shouldered a large garbage bag that had been laid at his feet behind him and held the door open for me. Go on then. He's got an interview or something today, so you can wait for him in the break room. 15 EI took the door from him and held it open and turned so he could take the garbage. Thanks, Eddie nodded. His bag was dripping garbage slime, which is never pleasant, but he didn't seem bothered to have it hauled over his shoulder. When he walked it past me, there wasn't the lingering smell of garbage, but there was something like iron. He walked on, and I walked into the hotel, the door closing behind me. I looked down at the polished floor, and there were stains where the garbage bag had been. They were a little ruddy red-brown, like the kind you'd see on a counter or a cutting board after cutting up a steak. Expired meat, I thought to myself. I realized Eddie wouldn't take too long to throw out the trash, and I had to be out of sight by the time he arrived. Get caught. I sprinted down the hall through a few sets of double doors, heading inward to the best of my approximation, hoping to hit a lobby or room numbers to guide my way. Soon enough, the tile floor turned to green carpet, and the ornate facade was back. As I walked into the main rooms, I looked at the first door beside me, 025E. It wasn't where I was supposed to be, but it gave me an idea of where to go. Kat showed me a direct route on the map, so I knew I had to walk to the north wing first, which meant following E's numbers until they dwindled to one near the lobby, and then continuing on the way I would have if I entered through the southern entrance. I still had my coat and my phone, but this wasn't unmanageable. I could fake it. First things first, I had to get rid of my stuff. The hall was ornate, decorated with slim wooden tables and delicate golden electric lighting. There were pieces of ivory, jade, and copper art that looked expensive. I quickly removed my coat and my phone by 011E and kind of bundled both up and shoved it in a nice wide porcelain vase. I wasn't about to lose a stupid interview over a technicality. I continued on, half afraid. I was already lost until I hit the first wall with a copper bust of some 1800s guy. Kat had mentioned it before. I was in the hall directly behind the lobby and standing directly behind the concierge's desk. Now all I had to do from here is turn left, or I would have if I was coming from the south side. Now I just had to keep walking, and I'd be there. I keep going, turning right at the women's restroom, and then 002 in was on the right. As I passed the bust, two chatting women dressed as staff rounded the corner and spotted me. When they did, they went dead silent. They didn't slow down, but they stared, jaws falling a little slack at the sight of me. I tried to smile back, but they ducked their heads away and kept walking. One of the girls dropped something. It was heavy enough that they should have been able to hear the dull thud, but they rounded the corner instead of stopping. It was a key. I picked it up, and it was clearly an old-fashioned room key. Not a card for an electric door, but a heavy brass key with a little tag that said 001. I backtracked a little, trying to catch their attention. They huddled closer together, walking arm in arm, whispering and giggling to one another. One threw her head back to sneak a glance at the empty hall and looked genuinely surprised to see me. I held the key up, showing her wordlessly what she left. She nodded and tossed her head to the side, as if saying get going, but she raised her hand to her lips and turned her back to me. Breaking into a run arm in arm with her friend, I turned the key over in my hands. This was the part of the hall I was supposed to walk into. The instructions said I wasn't supposed to talk to the staff. Maybe she knew that. Maybe she was one of Kat's friends and was helping me out. Should I have left the key on the ground? Was this a part of this weird hazing? I have debated just leaving it on the floor, but it was in my hand anyway. I'd turn it into the guy in my interview and tell him what happened. Maybe that was the point of it. Finally, I found room 002 in was where Kat said it'd be, the second to last door in a dead-end hall. The last door, 001, was propped open, slightly ajar. Inside, the lights were off, giving me only a glimpse of the carpet. I knocked twice on 002 in like I was supposed to. Come in, I heard from the other side of the door. I remained outside, at ease, knowing what Kat and I had rehearsed. Hey, I said come in. The guy on the other side called a little louder. I shifted a little, debating if I should knock again. No, two knocks. The cat had even rapped her knuckles against the table, and we went over it. I was supposed to wait for two knocks. As I waited, I heard another noise just behind me from 001. The door squeaked on its hinges. When I turned, it was a little more open, but I still couldn't see much from my angle. I could hear something inside, though. Someone was moving around, scratching against the wall just across from me. I heard a voice like an old man's moan weakly. Help, he said, his voice sorrowful and cracked. Somebody help. I don't know what made me weary. Maybe it was something in the voice. Desperate, yes, but a little too clear, like it knew I was there to hear it. Some instinctive part of me told me to stay put. Then the groaning stopped, and there was a heavy thud, like a fist pounding the wall. I heard the man inside groan and shuffle again, slowly making his way down the length of the room closer to the door. I knocked again at 002 in. Hey, there's someone here. I called, only to be met with no response. The groaning crept closer to the door. Help. Just help. I rushed to door 001, grabbed the handle, and slammed it shut. I didn't look inside, but I caught a waft of the smell. The pungent stench of a sewer on a rainy day came to mind, like something had died and rotted inside. Then a hand reached out and grabbed my wrist and tugged. I was thrown back against the opposite side of the hall, and there was Kat pulling the door closed. Room 001 shook as the thing on the opposite side threw its full weight against the door. Kat turned and looked at me, holding her hand out. The key, she hissed. The key? My hands were shaking. As I fished into my pocket for the brass key, I hardly had it out of my pocket when Kat snatched it away and locked the door. Another powerful bang sent her stumbling back to the opposite side of the hall. It was then I heard two calm, controlled knocks behind me. I nearly jumped back to the other side before suddenly remembering this was 002 in, and I was waiting on them. I looked at the cat, who paused midway through fixing her blouse. Cat pulled me onto my feet and fixed my tie. "Don't worry about that," Cat whispered hastily. "Tell them you locked the door with no one's help." I wasn't here. Go. I practically threw the door open and sprinted in. 3 members of the hotel staff sat inside, all very composed, and evidently confused by my heavy breathing and my no doubt priceless expression. "What's the matter, love? You look absolutely shaken," the woman behind the desk asked. I immediately shut my mouth, taking in exactly who was in the room and where. There were 3 people Cat had warned me, but they weren't. They were more distracting than I expected. Cat told me to expect to see a man in a red vest, and I did since I'd stumbled into his chair. What I didn't expect was for him to be badly burned. A nasty pinkish scar ran up his neck, shriveling his chin, his ear, and his nostrils. One eye was permanently shut, and the other was crooked. The other was a woman who stood in the corner. She loomed over the chair next to the man in red, her sunken eyes fixed intensely on me. There's no other word to describe her other than intense. I felt like I was under scrutiny for how I moved and how loud my steps were as I passed her. She was very tall, so tall she had developed a hunch from years of bending her neck to look down at people. She said nothing to me, but her head turned, tracking me as I went. The last was the woman in green the first wasn't supposed to speak to. She was sharply dressed and quite pretty, but was also the one sitting behind the desk where I expected my interviewer to be. I wasn't supposed to speak to her, wasn't I? That was the whole point Cat had drilled into my head. The one I wasn't supposed to worry about was the looming woman who twitched when I took my seat in the chair behind the desk. "Can I get you a glass of water, love?" The woman in green asked sweetly. "You're our 10 o'clock, aren't you, Jesse Fox?" "He's skinny," the tall one said, buggy eyes still set on me. Her pale tongue darted out to lick her lips. "Behave, Lori," the man told the tall woman. "Jesse, this is Lori Bellyford, honorary front office manager," he said, nodding to the tall woman. He then gestured to the woman in green. "Frederick X. Sardi, the general manager of this hotel, and I'm Robert Strauss, chief concierge and hiring manager. You can tell us a little about yourself. It's a pleasure to meet you as well. I'm excited for this opportunity to become a part of the Grants." I couldn't remember the stupid word used between this part. "Illustrious team," Frederica supplied. Close enough, I'd say. The 3 of them chuckled a little. I looked at Robert. There's something in room 1 that Robert held up a hand. "We'll get to that, okay? Did you have any trouble finding the entrance?" Robert asked. No, someone walked out when I walked in." "At which entrance?" "The east one." "Strange. I was sure both were locked," Robert said. Looking dead on at me, he arched a brow, waiting for my input. "When I provided none," he continued. "Why'd you lie?" "I didn't have any trouble finding the entrance." "Do you know what was in a bag?" Lori asked, her voice pitched high and eager. "What bag?" Robert asked, looking confused. "The bag Eddie had," Lori said. I shook my head, too terrified by her gaze to really reply to her. Robert arched a brow. "You saw Eddie, the janitor?" "For a second," I said hesitantly. Robert and Frederica shared a look, but Frederica smiled. "It is an east side entrance." Robert cleared his throat and moved on. "Then you saw 2 girls drop a key to room 1. Why'd you keep it?" "I wasn't going to keep it. I was going to give it to them when I came in. But then, room 1, the woman in green supplied." I almost answered in the affirmative, and then stopped myself. She smiled wide, amused to nearly catch me. "What did you do?" Robert asked. "I closed the door and locked it." "That's it." "Yeah." "Why didn't you go into the room to see who was calling?" He asked. "I had a bad feeling." "And you weren't tempted to walk in, to see?" Robert asked. "That was a test, wasn't it?" I asked. "Are people supposed to look? If they don't want to be here, Lori said with that wrinkled, overeager grin. Does she upset you? Frederica asked me suddenly, with a wicked grin. As she did, Lori's wrinkled face curled into a frown, and her eyes were still menacing, facing me. I wanted to protest, but I'm not supposed to speak to her. I started weighing how much I cared about the rules in a place already as twisted as this. She does, doesn't she? Frederica taunted. Hear that, Lori? He thinks you're disgusting. Lori stomped forward and suddenly was looming over me, and I had nowhere to go but the back of my chair as buggy eyes glared further and further down into me then. Robert cleared his throat. That'll be enough, thank you. Lori and Frederica stood, and I stood as well as they both made their exits. I looked at Robert then. What kind of place is this? One that requires discretion, a good sense of memorization and improvisation. I think you'll be a good fit here, Robert said. Standing and walking over to the desk, he unlocked a cabinet drawer and pulled out some papers. He then drew a handkerchief and reached up, pulling up a piece of the skin at the top of his forehead. I nearly leapt up out of my seat as he started peeling the skin back. Holy Robert kept pulling until half his face was removed, but there was no fleshy muscle beneath. Just a regular half of a face. It was makeup. Burn makeup. Excuse me a moment. The prosthetics itch, but I'd like to make you an offer to sign on with us. It was all makeup. I asked. Part of the interview. The baguette he carried was meant to be suspicious, and Joe gets a kick out of scaring the new guys in room 1. See? Like I said, this is a job that's unpredictable, and we look for a certain personality type. We try to learn it as quickly as possible. Robert wiped off the rest of the makeup with his handkerchief and looked like a normal man in his mid-40s. Most people break with Lori or forget the rules with Freddie. I looked dumbfounded from the door to him. That's it. That's the interview. Yes. Don't you want to ask me questions? Oh, I've learned about everything I need to know from you. The fact that you were able to find us and send a letter of inquiry to us at all is to start to let me know, what kind of place this is. Following the rules and your reaction to our surprises for you tells me everything else I need to know. What kind of place do you work that you need to know how I'd react to a bloody bag and a guy moaning from another room? Robert straightened and smiled as if that was a question with the most obvious answer. We're a luxury hotel. Half our job is going about as if it's business as usual, but it's not. There's a lot of protocol to follow, and it requires you to know what to do in a lot of situations. Did you have anyone help you with the rules? No, I say as I rehearsed. I wasn't supposed to show them to anyone else. Also an extreme part of this test. Good, Robert said. If you can't memorize and follow those instructions in the time we gave you, then you wouldn't be able to handle this job. But you were a natural. But you still have enough independence that you're not completely lacking in critical thought. You'll do well here. Listen, after all this, I don't even know if I want this job. Robert didn't say anything, just showed me the starting salary. This was the walk-through fire, but I can guarantee if you sign on with us, so long as you stick to the rules, you'll be fine. The money was good. Really good. The first set of rules wasn't so bad. If this was some kind of weird promoting discretion, then fine. Joe and Eddie were a setup. I could keep my mouth shut. If they let me in, and all I had to do was learn a routine, fine. So I took the job. It was better than anything I get in a lab, and in that moment, things had gone from terrifying to completely lax. I signed a contract there and went home with a set of rules, a schedule, and a signing bonus. I was giddy, waving my check in Brian's face. Jill came by later, and I wholeheartedly thanked her too. Jill, I'm so glad you keep good friends. I said as I tore into the new list of rules. What do you mean? Catherine. Who? Catherine. I still couldn't remember her last name. Your sorority sister. You were sitting with her at your reunion before we arrived. Oh, Jill nodded. I turned back to my employee contract and pulled out the new list of rules, flipping to the first page. You mean that blonde girl? Jill asked. I only met her that night. I thought she was a friend of yours. Rule number 1. Never speak to Catherine. Never give her your name. Well, shit.